Hi juniors, this is Dr. Cyril Benedict. Welcome to my YouTube channel PhD Medici. Let's crack PhD from exam point of view.
So let's start with epidemiology first. To begin with, what is epidemiology? Epidemiology in blank statement is the study of epidemics. So we should know what is an epidemic, etc. Okay, so what is an epidemic? An epidemic is a sudden onset or sudden increase in the number of cases of a disease in a particular region which is clearly in excess than the normal count. So a sudden spike or sudden increase in the number of cases in a particular region which is clearly in excess than the normal prevalence of a disease. Okay, so what is an endemic? An endemic is a constant presence of a disease in a community. For example, what are the diseases that are constantly present in India? Pertaining to dentistry, we can tell endemic fluorosis. The word itself contains endemic fluorosis. The next, malaria, tuberculosis, yellow fever, all these diseases are endemic to India. Examples for an epidemic disease, recently we have seen spikes of Nipah virus, Zika virus, avian influenza, swine influenza, and finally, pandemic. Pandemic means nothing but it is an epidemic that spreads from one geographical region to another geographical region in a very short period of time. It could be from one country to another country, like as in COVID, or it could be from one state to another state or one province to another province, whatever it is. An epidemic becomes a pandemic when it spreads from one geographical region to another geographical region so quickly. Now let's see the classification of studies in epidemiology. Basically, epidemiology is or epidemiological studies are classified as observational and experimental. Under observational studies, you have another two subtypes, that is descriptive and analytical. Okay, and under this analytical, we have ecological, cross sectional, case control, and finally cohort. There is a reason why I wrote the subtypes of analytical studies in this order, because only in this order the evidence increases. So when you speak about an analytical study, the evidence from an analytical study is least in ecological study, and the best evidence of an analytical study is in a cohort study. Okay, so when you go a level up, when you speak about evidence, so the least evidence is in descriptive study. The next level of evidence is in an analytical study. The best evidence is in an experimental study. So whenever you start with an hypothesis, you usually begin with a descriptive study. You first do a descriptive study, you then do any of the analytical study. Better to go in that order. Okay. Then after gaining some better evidence in both these stages, you then go to experimental study. So finally I can tell, start with an observational study, then go to an experimental study. This is the usual menu of a epidemiological study. So after seeing this classification of epidemiological studies, we are supposed to see one another way of looking into this classification. There is something called a hypothesis. Okay, so hypothesis is a statement that should be proved or disproved by doing a research. So all these classifications depends on how you view the hypothesis or how you approach the hypothesis. In this regard, I can classify these studies as descriptive studies as hypothesis formulation. Okay, then analytical studies are hypothesis testing studies. Then experimental studies are hypothesis confirmation studies. So, for example, when there is a new epidemic, when there is a new disease, people or the researchers or the medical scholars do not just jump into certain hypotheses. Okay, they do basically a descriptive study. Okay, they just start observing the trends. They ask why, what, whom. Okay, they ask these questions. What is the disease? When is the disease occurring? Upon whom is the disease occurring? Why is the disease occurring to that specific age group or gender or that comorbid population? So when they ask these questions, they basically do a kind of a descriptive study. They observe. Okay, so when there is a new disease, medical scholars or epidemiologists initially formulate a hypothesis. They formulate a hypothesis using a descriptive study. So the hypothesis that they formulated, they will test it by doing an analytical study. So first is formulation, next is testing. Testing the formulated hypothesis by doing an analytical study.
Let us have an example. Imagine this is 1950s or 60s. With the inception of processed foods and industrialization, packed foods and sugar sweetened beverages like Coke, Pepsi, and sweetened fresh juices, there is a sudden increase in the dental caries among children below 6 years. Okay, so we start seeing this trend and we try to name the condition. So initially we named the condition as rampant caries because it is so rampant among children. So the scholars or epidemiologists around the world, they first formulate a hypothesis. Okay, in this example, the hypothesis that we formulate is like sugar sweetened beverages, okay, SSBs, are linked with dental caries or rampant caries, or maybe I can write ECC. Okay, so this is a formulated hypothesis. Now it is our duty to test the hypothesis using an analytical epidemiology study. Okay, so imagine, let us take an example of a case control study. So the case control study design goes like this: there should be some group of children who already have this rampant caries. Okay, for example, ECC. There should be another group of children who do not have this rampant caries, that is no ECC. You take 50 children in each. Okay, you take 50 children here, 50 children here. Okay, so you ask questions to their parents about their children's exposure to sugar sweetened beverages like fresh juices and cool drinks during their second, third, and fourth years of life. Okay, so you get two responses in each. Few tell yes and few tell no. In this group also, few tell yes and few tell no. So you see that in the group of children who already have rampant caries, more children among that group have been exposed to sugar sweetened beverages. So naturally, by looking into it, you can come to a conclusion. Okay, see, you have done an analytical study now. You have done a case control type of analytical study now. You took two groups. One group was already having the disease. The control group was not having the disease. You asked one question pertaining to their exposure, that is to their parents. Okay, were your children exposed to increased consumption of sugar sweetened beverages in their formative years? Okay, so you get the answer, and this answer, this data looks overwhelmingly convincing that there is a positive association between sugar sweetened beverages and ECC. See, the beauty is now the hypothesis that you have formulated, you have also tested it by doing a case control study, and you have again got a favorable response. Again, linking sugar sweetened beverages and early childhood caries.
Now we have tested it, Now it is our duty to confirm it. So I'll tell an example which might not be ethically acceptable nowadays, but this is how you should understand what is an experimental study. So in all these cases, you didn't do anything, okay? You just observed, you described, you analyzed, and you actually observed. Whereas in experimental study, you're gonna give something to the patients or the participants and finally see the outcome. So what you do here, you take two group of children. In one group, I mean, you take two groups of parents with children who are less than 3 to 4 years. Okay, then you you give them sugar sweetened beverages. You expose the children. You intervene and you expose the children to sugar sweetened beverages for, I mean, throughout the ages before 5 or 6 age. Then there is another group of children you withheld. You do not give SSB. So there are two groups. One is a case group, another is control group. Okay, in test group you give sugar sweetened beverages to the parents to be given to the children. So in one group you are exposing the children to sugar sweetened beverages. You are exposing, that is why it is experimental study. In another group you are withholding the usage of sugar sweetened beverages like, rasna, cool drinks, fruit juices, packed fruit juices, tropicana, coke, Pepsi. Okay, you are withholding that. So in both these arms of the study you are doing or you are withholding certain thing which would have been otherwise changed. This is the basic design in an experimental design. Okay, so this is a group of 50 children and this is a group of 50 children. So after 2 to 3 years you see the incidence of ECC in both group. Okay, so now you see, what happens usually. The group that received sugar sweetened beverage might have got more incidence of early childhood caries than the group of children who are not exposed to sugar sweetened beverages. So finally you conclude that yes, you confirm the hypothesis that sugar sweetened beverages does result in ECC.
So let us have a short recap of what we saw. What is epidemiology? It is the study of distribution and determinants of health related states or events in specified population and the application of these studies for the control of health problems. So another way is epidemiology is the study of epidemics. So what is an epidemic? An epidemic is a sudden increase in the number of cases which is clearly in excess than normal. Okay. So the best examples are swine flu, avian influenza, Zika virus, Nipah virus, etc. What is an endemic then? It is the constant presence of a disease in a community. The best examples are endemic fluorosis, typhoid, dengue, malaria, tuberculosis in India, etc. And an epidemic becomes a pandemic when it rapidly spreads from one region to another region in a very short time. So that's the word rapid. Okay. So, epidemiological studies are basically divided into observational and experimental. In observational, you do not interfere the natural history of the disease. Okay, you just observe. In observational, you have two types: descriptive epidemiology and analytical epidemiology. This analytical epidemiology is further divided into four studies. That is ecological, cross-sectional, case control, and cohort. I have written it in this order because the evidence is like this: the highest evidence is in cohort study, the least evidence is in ecological study. So there is one another thing that I forgot to tell in the main lecture. In all these three studies, individuals are the unit of study. Okay, individuals are the unit of study. Okay, you do these three studies on individuals or individual groups, whereas ecological study, population is the unit of study. Okay, when looked upon from a different perspective, descriptive epidemiology is also called as hypothesis formulation studies. Analytical epidemiology is called as hypothesis testing study, and experimental epidemiology is called as hypothesis confirmation studies. So basically, hypothesis is a statement of or a problem which can be tested, or which should be proved or disproved by doing an epidemiological study. The example we saw was sugar sweetened beverages and early childhood caries or rampant caries. That's it, guys. Hope this video was helpful to you. Don't worry if you have started late. Remember, it's not about the timing, it's about your first step. Happy preparation.